You're listening to the UAE's #1 talk radio station.
This is Afternoons on Dubai Eye 103.8.
I'm Helen Farmer. Fantastic to have you with us on the Afternoons podcast. We're talking perimenopause, menopause, mental health, and ultimately some of the lifestyle changes and yes, some interventions as well that could be helping you out personally and maybe professionally too. Joining us is the CEO of Aquitude. We've got Christina Ioannidis joining us to take my questions, of which I have many, and yours as well. So you are more than welcome to reach out on 4001 on the ARN Play app and the WhatsApp too. You can be anonymous. And Christina, we've had a number of anonymous messages and that is A-OK. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you very much. And thank you for having me. And I look forward to answering as many questions as possible.
You're glowing, by the way, looking very, very healthy and vital, and hopefully full of energy because, as I said, it's going to be a busy one. I think the mental health piece around menopause is something that is only starting to be discussed a little bit, and that's fine because it's been, even 5 years ago we were barely talking about menopause. So the fact that the conversations come on when we think about the physical symptoms, but now a lot of women coming forward and saying, I'd heard about the hot flushes, I'd heard about, I knew that menopause was absolute when my periods had stopped for a year, but I'm really struggling mentally. What are some of the things that you're hearing from clients and even anecdotally in the community?
Well, listen, it is absolute reality that mental health is a real issue when it comes to perimenopause and menopause. I also struggled with it myself without having any idea why. So let me share some stats with you. In research that's been done with midlife women, so perimenopause, menopause, 66% of women are on antidepressants.
What?
In the UK, 16% of 45 to 64-year-old women take antidepressants. In the US, 20% of women in their 40s and 50s take antidepressants, and that goes up in their 60s to 24% of women.
I'm shooketh by this.
Well, the reason I share the stats is because when we are going through these shifts and these transitions, we don't necessarily need antidepressants. So there's a big difference between clinical depression and the depression that we're talking about, which is hormonally induced.
Goodness me. And I'm not shocked because I think antidepressants are bad. Quite the opposite. I was on them for a number of years following postnatal depression for about 5 years.
Yes.
Came off them a year ago and thankfully everything's been great. So I'm certainly not, oh my goodness, it's a disgrace that people are on antidepressants. That's certainly not where my shock is coming from. But that's a very, very high number. And I guess it's the misdiagnosis or the lack of understanding in a doctor's clinic.
Well, it's the latter. And I think this is where we come into. So it's not about shaming antidepressants.
Absolutely
it is not absolutely any fault of individuals that they might need to be on them. But when it happens to us, and again, I'm going to give you another stat that women this is a research that was done on 6,000 women. With depressive symptoms, they were associated with twice as many cognitive impairment and dementia issues further down the line. So the issue that we face as women, and this is the crux, I think, of our conversation, is when we don't treat depression in the right way, with the right approaches, shall we say, we then have a very high likelihood, unfortunately, of cognitive impairment and dementia down the line, which women are twice as likely as men to get.
Wow, okay. So it's about, I don't want to say prevention rather than cure, but certainly a greater understanding. And when you're talking about depressive symptoms there, what would come under that category, Christine?
Well, it is very much about not being able to just even have straight thoughts, not being able to just feel that feeling of being low energy. It's a combination, and everyone is so different. So what's depressive to me might be completely different to you. And of course, that includes things like anxiety. I know that one of your questions relates.
Yeah, we've already had a text of exactly that about anxiety rather than depression. So Barb, we will be coming to that soon. So when you're thinking about lack of awareness or understanding in a doctor's clinic, how much training do you think, your average family doctor or GP gets when it comes to mental health around the menopause?
Well, listen, in the UK, the research that has been done, it demonstrates that around menopause, they get about an hour and a half worth of training when it comes down to understanding symptoms. But this is not, and please, let's make this very clear, this is not about shaming the medical profession. They do the best they can. What it is
Especially
about,
looking at the UK now, they are really doing the best they can,
yes.
stretched as you can.
So what it is for us, I think it's important, and this is why I always advocate for women to advocate for themselves and learn and be educated. Mm-hmm. So the way I work with my clients is I say to them, this is not an issue. In the same way like I was not diagnosed with what were the issues behind my personal depression, I think it's down to us to say, okay, let's take the conversation into our doctor's office to say, could there be other reasons why I may be depressed? Could it be, in my case, it was thyroid dysfunction. So I have hypothyroidism, which is very common, especially for perimenopausal women. So it's saying, okay, could it be that? Let's look at my T3, T4, and TSH, which are the typical hormones that you need. And I don't want to go into a biology lesson in order to gauge whether the thyroid is working well, for example.
Christina Ioannidis with today. She's the CEO of AquaTutors, a consultant, a trainer, a speaker, someone who's so passionate about raising awareness and starting conversations around the perimenopause, the menopause. And we're having a special look at mental health today, taking your questions on the text line. And really, I think, I don't even want to say busting some myths, but certainly busting open some taboos, the things that just haven't been discussed in the past. And the stats you were just sharing earlier about the number of women on antidepressants at this time in their lives. Can I ask you then, how is midlife depression different to clinical depression, Christina?
Well, firstly, I have to make it very clear, I am not a psychiatrist. So I think this is a question also that psychiatrists need to be aware of, and maybe you can bring them on the show. But in terms of, it's the source of the depression. It's in the midlife depression, we're talking about hormonal imbalances. That's the source, which could include, as I said, thyroid imbalances, but it's also high stress, where you have too much of a hormone called cortisol. And if we don't manage that, what tends to happen with us women is because of the balance between cortisol and another hormone called insulin. I'm sorry to kind of go into the biology of this, but if we don't reduce cortisol, insulin levels tend to go up as we actually become even more, let's say, mature.
I think it's such a kind of a cruel irony, though, isn't it, when we think about what women are going through in this time of their life? Because if we're talking about 40s into 50s, often at the absolute peak of your career, you might have parents look after, you might have children to look after, and then your body's like, oh, I'm going to go completely haywire. So we've got all these physical symptoms that we touched on earlier, but also the mental health symptoms, which, as I said, we're getting lots of messages about, Christina. So can we go to the text line?
Absolutely.
Barbara's saying, what about anxiety rather than depression? She says, this is totally new for me. I'm 52, also insomnia, and then a sleepy looking face emoji.
Yeah, well, you might recall that the last interview that you and I had together, I mentioned to you there's about 37 different symptoms of menopause and perimenopause.
Oh my gosh.
So anxiety, heart palpitations, obviously the hot flashes, they're very typical. Now, they are again likely to be linked, because some people might not get depression. They might get more of the anxiety, like some people get more of the mood swings and more of the hot flashes. So individuals are completely different. So it is part of, could it be that? So we need to investigate. I say we have to become our own detectives. We have to be able to have a conversation with our physicians to say, what are my hormones looking like? And that's the whole panel. And that's, we're talking about the sex hormones, as I mentioned, insulin, fasting insulin, glucose levels. And I'm sorry, it sounds very biological, but unfortunately, that's the level of granularity we need to look at in order to be able to then say to the doctor, well, is something not quite right?
When it comes to insomnia, which is something, I mean, my poor mum, always falling asleep with her earpods in, often listening to Afternoons with Helen Farmer podcast. Thank you very much, Barbara Spearman. But struggling terribly with it. Is there anything that's worked for you in the past or with your clients, whether it be that supplementation or, I don't know, I mean, anything?
Do you know what's interesting? Research shows that for insomnia, one of the best things to do is to avoid eating too late. And so because what then happens for our bodies is our blood sugars rise if we eat late, and then it impacts the rhythm by which we naturally would go to sleep, which is called the circadian rhythm. So the first thing to do, and I always encourage, and I do, and I've had to do myself, is also stop eating around 6:30, 7 o'clock. Because the later you eat, the more likely that you are going to go to or try to go to bed, and your insulin levels are high, and that means your body is kind of in that mode of, ooh, I'm not ready to go to bed, or it then rises as we go through our sleep cycles, because our sleep cycles tend to be 90 minutes, and then we get then an extra burst in the middle of the night.
Ah, yes.
Which is what, that 3 a.m.
3 a.m. wake-up time.
Yep, which most of us have had to contest with.
I've had it. Okay, now I was wondering if this message was going to come in, because it's something that I've been struggling with. No Name is struggling with brain fog. To say I'm on HRT patches, but regularly suffering with brain fog. Mid-sentence, sometimes even forget what I'm saying. It's to an extent that I can cope with, but I'm taking minutes in meetings. My brain sometimes just switches off after 20 minutes and I can't engage it. It is awful. Any suggestions?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for raising this. I am someone that has absolutely prided myself on my memory all the way through my life, all the way through, to almost that kind of creepy extent of being really good with faces and names where, 10 years after meeting someone at a brunch, I'm like, oh my goodness, I remember that your mum's from blah, blah, and they look at me going, you are a stalky weirdo. Like, why do you remember that? Had kids, getting older. I swear, live in fear of repeating back a conversation to somebody who told me that fact in the first place.
Well, listen, it's a great question, and thank you to No Name.
Thank
I
you,
love the name
No
No Name. It's what's interesting about this as well is as we go through our midlife transformation, so does our brain. And estrogen protects our brain. This is one of the reasons why we see as we reduce our estrogen levels when we go into menopause, our brain starts functioning, let's just say, at less efficiently, which would include things like brain fog. And this is where we need to support our brain. The first thing we need to do is move.
Okay.
Because these endorphins help create more neural connections in our brains. The second thing we have to do is consume omega-3.
Okay.
Because our brain absorbs, and it requires the way it produces its energy, because it is an energy hogger, it requires fats. And the omega-3 fats are what makes the brain function.
So you can fuel it that way.
So you can fuel it. So this is where we're talking about things like salmon. And I know that people say, oh, but salmon? Well, I don't like salmon. Well, there's shellfish. There's obviously things like milk that you can drink. Find what works for you. So it's omega-3. And then what worked for me, and this is also linked to depression, what also worked for me and works for a lot of women, in our brains, we actually have a serotonin, which is a feel-good hormone. Sometimes we lack an amino acid called tryptophan. So I would encourage to either take a supplement called L-tryptophan, which helps the fueling of the amino acid to produce more serotonin.
Googling it right now.
Or eat pumpkin seeds, yogurt, chicken, milk, all these foods, and Google them, that contain this thing called tryptophan.
Oh, I like it. Okay, so foods that have the most, you just mentioned a lot of them. Milk, canned tuna, turkey and chicken, oats, cheese, nuts and seeds, bread, chocolate, very happily, given that you've just bought me a box of beautiful Greek chocolate. So this is the amino acids needed for normal growth, but production and maintenance of proteins, muscles, enzymes, and crucially, when we're talking about brain fog, neurotransmitters.
Absolutely.
Okay, tryptophan. I'm going to have a little hop onto iHerb during the news. Consultant trainer, speaker, Christina is with us today. She is the CEO of Aquitude, and we're talking mental health, menopause, perimenopause. And I want to know, we were just talking about tryptophan then, about supplementation, there's neurotransmitters, boosting the brain power, omega-3 to fuel the brain. What else should be in our women of a certain age supplement toolkit, Christina?
In the supplement toolkit, definitely we need vitamin D3, because vitamin D3 helps us build. First of all, it's a hormone itself, and it helps build our immunity. So that's a definite for everybody. Most people, by the way, are actually deficient in vitamin D3 because we're mostly indoors, especially in climates like this. So we don't actually spend enough time, ironically, in the sun, where the hormone or vitamin D3 is actually produced. So that's a definite. May I also add something else that isn't just supplementation?
Of course.
And the thing, what's really important is about how we exercise. Because, and I can tell you with loads of my clients, even with myself, they come to this part of their life, and they think, you know what, I'm going to bash myself at the gym, I'm going to go crazy, I'm going to do cardio. What's been shown by research is that when you do too much of the super high intensity cardio, it actually works against our body. So what we need, and this has been backed by research done in Australia, where they've seen that what we need is 5 days, 30 minutes of low to moderate intensity exercise is the ideal for women. And it is not the going crazy like I used to, doing spinning, and going, just bashing myself in the gym, and like a lot of other women that I know who think that's the best way for us to regulate.
Well, you are bang on trend. There was an article that came out just today talking about exactly this, saying be careful with HIIT in particular over the age of 40, higher risk of injury as well. Remembering, and we were just talking about longevity earlier in the show, but we can't bury our heads completely in the sand, that really, joints and tendons are on borrowed time as we get older. So when you're talking about low intensity, what works for you and what's worked with clients in terms of, I mean, anyone who tells me you don't need to do a burpee, I am all hail Christina.
You got a great sense of humor in that one.
I hate them.
Although you do need a little bit of HIIT.
You want the heart to be going a little bit.
High intensive and interval training. You do a little bit of that. What you don't want to do is 5 days a week, which is the other extreme that we're talking about. So in terms of what we need to be doing, so remember I talked earlier about cortisol. Intensity, cardio, increases cortisol, which then makes us what's called more insulin resistant. So what we need to do is exercise that reduces our cortisol levels, which is anything that flares up our parasympathetic response, which is the normal, more relaxed mode. And that's anything that you enjoy, whether it is yoga, Pilates. Some people like meditation. Meditation doesn't work for me. I've got to tell you this. So I'm not going to tell you what to do, but anything that you enjoy, dancing, anything that gives you, but at least there's movement. And there's something really important that I'd like to touch upon that you mentioned about joints. And I am the number one role model in the sense that I used to have painful joints in my mid-40s. I now can do anything you could possibly imagine with my fabulous reborn knees in my 50s. I've just turned 50.
Tell me your ways, because I'm 40 with knackered knees with no collagen or cartilage.
Well, talking there, chondroitin, glucosamine, is actually something I took as a supplement because it comes from shellfish, and that helps rebuild cartilage. So I was told you've got arthritic knees. Nobody likes the A word because it reminds
me about it. I was like, Helen, you're 40 with the knees of a 77-year-old. It's pretty sobering chat from an orthopedic surgeon.
However, yes, and we have to think about what the agenda are for surgeons.
I think a bit of insurance money in that particular situation.
Let's calm down. Let's not be what's the word, theorists?
Let's just say I'm not being conspiracy theorist. But what I would say is losing a bit of weight and being active has helped my knees in the short term far more.
Eating anti-inflammatory food. So this is where inflammation in the body comes in. So I think one of the biggest things that we don't realize is also as we age, unfortunately, we tend to become estrogen is actually, and especially if we have too much of it, it is actually it messes around with our metabolic system, and we actually then accumulate more inflammation in the body. So we need to reduce our inflammation. You're going to say to me, how do we do that? And we need to cut out foods that don't work with our bodies. Most people, it's gluten or lactose. And unfortunately, because I'm a carnivore to death, meat or too much of it, and obviously I'm not going to talk about processed foods because that's a no-no anyway, but those, and cheese and milk tend to be purely because of the fact that animals are a little bit stressed. They have too much estrogen nowadays, the way they're cured, let's call it. Those also work against our hormones and also increase our inflammatory levels.
Interesting. Okay, Christina, to the text line, you've just mentioned estrogen. Message here saying, hello, I'm 44 years old with no menopausal symptoms apart from yelling at my kids. I think that's a universal symptom of having children. My hormones were checked, which showed low estrogen estrogen levels. The doctor thinks I'm perimenopausal and I should start HRT, but feel it's still too early as I still get a regular period. How can I boost estrogen levels naturally?
Yes, there's a lot of ways you can try, but remember, this is very much a trial and error for you. So see what works for you. One of the most important ways to increase estrogen is, as we said, to exercise. The second one is, sorry, I just had a thought there and it's gone. Yes, flax seeds.
Oh, really?
Flax seeds are fantastic for helping us boost estrogen and also regulate hormones. Flax seeds are those little golden things that, and you have to eat them, by the way, freshly, what's it called, ground.
Like milled.
Yeah, not just eat the whole thing, and because that will go straight through you, because it's very, very, it's high fiber. The other thing that you need to do is to balance your microbiome. And you're going to say to me, Christina, what's your microbiome? It's all the friendly gut bacteria that we have helping us basically digest our foods and absorb nutrients. So here we need to think about eating a lot of foods that are fermented. We were talking about cheese earlier.
But the right kind of cheese.
The right kind of cheese, exactly. So the kind of cheese a bit like Roquefort that has, I know it sounds terrible, but it has the blue.
Not mold, it's blue.
It's the blue bits. So that's a definite, and then anything that kimchi, tofu.
Bit of kefir,
Absolutely. That all helps build that microbiome, and that all helps then with managing our hormones. And also consider ashwagandha, talking about supplements, but that is also an adaptogen, what's called an adaptogen, and it helps with the rebalancing.
That's what I was recommending when I came off antidepressants in terms of that. Right, last question I think that we've got time for today. No name on this message, so thank you to Anonymous, you sound amazing, saying, I have a colleague who I line manage who's going through the menopause. She is excellent at her job, great track record, and we've got a really positive relationship. But the menopause has been having an effect on her mental health. Her confidence is rock bottom. She seems to think everyone's out to get her, and that every piece of feedback is negative and that she's not important. I'm really worried about her. I don't know what to do to support her. I've reassured her that she's brilliant at her job. I'm here to help. We've talked about ways to manage the brain fog, as you've been discussing. I think she's on HRT, but I don't know enough about how it works. And I make sure she has paid time off for all medical appointments. What else? Oh my goodness. Can you just have a chat with all bosses?
Well, first of all, yes, he or she
absolutely
is fabulous. So hats off, kudos to that individual. But when it comes to what tends to happen with us, and it happened with me and it happens to a lot of my clients as well, is we tend to withdraw. Because we don't know what's going on, we don't actually start having conversations on how we're feeling and what is happening. So one of the things that's worked really well, I actually run a club called the Midlife Reboots Tribe, where we just get together virtually and we just have conversations around what's happening inside us and the ways that we could all help each other. I also run programs for women, individual and group-based, where I get them to work through a lot of these challenges that hit us in midlife. And when our body's not in sync with us, our confidence also drops.
Well, as I said, we were discussing longevity on an earlier segment and talking about the 6 pillars of longevity. And yes, it was nutrition and movement and sleep and stress and supplements, but community was such an important pillar in that, in being supported and feeling like you've got value in supporting other people as well.
Absolutely.
So maybe it sounds like you're doing everything that is within your powers without perhaps being intrusive, because you don't want to sit down and be like, tell me about your prescription, because that might not be comfortable for her. But if she's feeling supported outside the workplace, maybe that confidence will carry through.
Absolutely. And I think that is fundamental. And the other thing I'd encourage, and I do a lot of work with corporates on this, is for them to actually incorporate internal conversations around the menopause and perimenopause. And so that's where internally they could do a lot more so that this woman doesn't feel like she's the only one. And you know what you find is when you open, it's kind of like scratching the surface. When you have one person having this conversation, all of a sudden there's more confidence in another woman to say, look, I'm also struggling. I've had these issues and I didn't know where they stemmed. So that would be great.
So in terms of services that you're able to offer, I mean, we are running out of time. We haven't run out of questions. We've had more insomnia queries. We've had thyroid questions. How do you support women, Christina, and how can people reach out to you?
So they can reach out to me through ChristinaIoannidis.com. which is, I know, a very long name and
Do you know
practically impronounceable.
As I've been struggling with for the last 45 minutes, I will get the website, and then if anyone wants to send me the word woman, let's make it positive, woman.
There you go.
I can send the link. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. You can drop a note through there. My Instagram, unfortunately, does contain my first and surname, so it's Christina Ioannidis _official. You can reach out to me there. So I'm open to supporting women. So what services? From being a health coach and helping you navigate these times and the conversations you need to have with your physicians. Because I'm going to say it again, I am not a certified doctor, and nor do we actually replace what your physician can and should be doing for you. What it is important is for all women and men to be educated about these issues so that they then can have the right conversations and ask the right questions.
And I think where your kind of value really lies is in that you've been through this, as I said, when you came in, you're so vibrant, and you're saying, well, that wasn't the case 10 years ago.
No,
and
it was not, definitely.
All of this has been put into practice, and it's all actionable.
Completely. And I would say and one of the things we didn't talk about, and I think is something that maybe we can talk about next time, is about the importance of things like time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting, because that's been shown to help particularly women in this transitionary phase.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Already people sending in the word woman, so I will happily send your Instagram and the website to anyone that gets in touch on 4001. You can use the ARN Play app, the WhatsApp if you prefer, help you get that support system that you need. Thank you so much, Christina.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure.